a lot on the line here for both Luca and Dillon as we get ready for this top 4 match.
It's going to be really exciting, too. We have another Miraidon mirror, except instead of the Lunala mirror as well, we've got the Calyrex Ice Rider for Dillon next to the Lunala of Luca. It's cool that we have 3 Miraidon Lunala in top 4, and the 4th trainer is also running Miraidon, so it just goes to show how successful those 2 Pokemon have been this weekend. But of course, Ice Rider Calyrex always going to be a titan of any format in which it is legal. Just again, looking at Luca's accomplishments, a couple regional top 4s, a regional championship, and a top 8 this season as well.
Yeah, the top 8 is definitely something that you cannot scoff at. It's been very difficult to even just get into the top cuts of these regionals and get even more out of that. So Dillon, of course, also very grateful for the opportunity to be here, and not just his, I think, like first real big top cut, but also making this an even better finish as we look towards the end of our Milwaukee Regional Championships. Luca, though, on this team, diving in a little bit deeper, we do have that choice band Urshifu. So we have a lock-in that you need to select, but also a lot more power behind each of those moves.
Very similar team to the mirror we just saw in the first top 4 match as well. I believe the same Pokemon, except a Whimsicott instead of the Grimmsnarl. So a different Prankster support Pokemon. Both have a light screen, but Whimsicott opting more for the Tailwind and Encore forms of control over the match instead of Grimmsnarl's Reflect and Thunder Wave. But of course, accompanied by that Assault Vest Miraidon with the Electric Terra, Choice Band Urshifu, like you called out, alongside the Guts Ursaluna, the Rocky Helmet Incineroar with U-Turn and Will-O-Wisp, a cool combination of moves on that Pokemon as well.
Yeah, Incineroar has been just such a key piece for a lot of these Miraidon and Lunala teams that we've seen. Incineroar just gives you a lot of that support power, but also just the ability to help out with these Intimidates, which have been very impactful. A lot of these physical Pokemon have not had clear amulets outside of maybe like the Ice Rider Calyrex or even the Koraidon. And of course, the Calyrex Ice on Dillon's side does have that clear amulet item, so you can't get those Intimidate drops on it. But what about the Ogerpon or the Iron Hands? Both very good targets for this Incineroar.
Choice Scarf Miraidon again coming out from Dillon. We didn't get to see it in his top 8 match against Joey, but something that could come in very handy here. You know they're going to be faster in the possible Miraidon mirror, especially if, you know, even if something like the Tailwind goes up, you're probably able to outspeed Pokemon like that Urshifu, maybe the Lunala, depending on how they're trained. So that speed advantage could give you an edge.
Yeah, but Dillon was very much leaning towards those Trick Room strategies when he played in that previous top cut match, and that Volcarona was also very important. So let's see how our trainers decide to approach this top 4 set as Dillon leads with the Miraidon and Iron Hands, and for Luca, it's going to be those restricteds both out right away.
Notably, no Protect on either of these 2 Pokemon. Lunala cannot be faked out on account of its Ghost typing, but the Miraidon on Luca's side of the field is vulnerable to something like the combination of a Fake Out and a Draco Meteor from Dillon's Miraidon, which we do get to see hit the field for the first time in this tournament. Iron Hand's in a pretty solid spot here as well, with that Assault Vest facing down 2 special attackers. Lunala is the Terra Fairy Moonblast set, not the Power Herb Meteor Beam set that we've seen a little bit this weekend. So it's threatening super effective damage on both of these 2 Pokemon, but without that same type of attack bonus, not going to be too much damage coming out just yet.
Miraidon knows it's under threat, so it decides to pivot out, and Incineroar now taking its place. Might be able to handle a Draco Meteor just a little bit better, but also you're getting that Intimidate drop onto the Iron Hands that got that attack boost from the Quark Drive thanks to the electric terrain. And Incineroar's going to take the fake out as well, so nice Rocky Helmet recoil going back over to the Iron Hands. As it's just going to be an attack into the Lunala, as Miraidon's able to do a good sizable amount, but the Moonblast back. I mean, without that Terra Fairy, it's just not going to be able to secure the KO onto this Miraidon just yet.
Breaking that Shadow Shield with an Electro Drift means that one more Electro Drift might be able to take a knockout on that Lunala, but a nice swap into the Incineroar there. You get some Rocky Helmet chip damage with that Iron Hands Fake Out, and of course you have the threat of your own Fake Out on this coming turn. So even though Miraidon has already put this Lunala in a bit of a precarious position, the Incineroar is there to protect it with a Fake Out of its own. I don't believe... Well, okay, Farigiraf exists. Like, Farigiraf could actually be a big deal here if Dillon did opt to bring it. That's always kind of the dance you have to do when you're facing a team that has that Farigiraf on it. Is it in the back? Is my opponent going to swap it in immediately to try and block any fake outs?
Well, it's actually going to be the Miraidon that switches out, though. So after getting that Electro Drift, you're going to see the Ogerpon now take its place. And Maybe a little unfortunate because the fake out from the Incineroar is going to go ahead and break that sturdy ability on the switch in. As the Drain Punch, though, into the Incineroar, it is super effective, but because we did see that Intimidate drop, it's not going to be dealing as much damage as what could have potentially been for this Iron Hands. Lunala also ends this turn by going for Trick Room, so now gets the speed advantage.
Speed advantage for Lunala over that Ogerpon, but the Iron Hands on Dillon's end is the naturally slowest thing on the field. Based on how these Pokemon are trained, it might be attacking before anything else thus far and might be able to take a knockout on that Incineroar with another Drain Punch. Lunala itself, though, still in a pretty solid position. Of course, the Iron Hands being at -1 attack means it might not be able to take the knockout with a Wild Charge. And of course, the Ogerpon having its sturdy broken by that Fake Out is a kind of a trade you had to make there if you were Dillon. You really didn't want that Miraidon taking any damage, but the sturdy is a big thing to lose.
Ooh, I mean, yeah, the Wild Charge. Lunala actually takes that pretty comfortably. If there's any follow-up there from the Ogerpon, then I think you're going to be in a great position if you're Dillon. But Luca gets a chance to actually preserve this Incineroar for later. U-turn, kind of one of those odd moves we were calling out on this Incineroar. A great option to have here. Just make sure that you can have that pivot for later and get your Ursaluna in basically for free. Lunala does have this Moongeist Beam, and as that targets into the Ogerpon, you actually see that it's still able to take that despite the fact that it's still a large source of damage. Is this a trade that Luca is willing to make with the Ivy Cudgel actually securing the KO onto the Lunala? You get your Ursaluna in for free, but what cost?
You've now lost your Wide Guard Lunala, and there's nothing on Luca's team that takes less than super effective damage from Earthquake, actually. So the ability to go for an Earthquake next to your teammate is now pretty reliant on going for a Terastallization. In particular, it kind of has to be this Incineroar that is the Terra Bug, which would resist ground. And unfortunately, the Miraidon is Terra Electric, so that's not an option there. Of course, the single target damage still a huge threat from Incineroar. There's no Intimidate for Dillon, so there's not really any way to mitigate that damage. And the Terastallization still available, so the Ghost-type Terra is something you could make use of. Dillon, well, not Dillon, but I guess we saw Joey earlier trying to capitalize that against his match against Lou. But in this case, the -1 Iron Hands, probably not going to be doing too much to Ursaluna if it does end up predicting that Wild Charge. And Ursaluna now is primed to start dealing some huge damage.
I think Ursaluna would just being able to go for headlong rushes into the Iron Hands is great. Miraidon, of course, doesn't want to take that either. You still have multiple turns of Trick Room being able to capitalize on if you are this Ursaluna. Dillon decides to just take this Iron Hands, put it back, bring it back out later, actually reset those Intimidate drops that it's taken so far, as you might just have to kind of sacrifice your Miraidon here. It's already very low. It was able to get off just a couple of Electro Drifts, and so, yeah, maybe it's time when you know that Trick Room still has a couple turns to go.
I think this Miraidon is kind of the best use for it in this case. You know, Trick Room is up. It's going to be very difficult to attack with this Choice Scarf Miraidon that's very, very fast with the speeds reversed. And the Facade is able to take out the Miraidon and give Luca the 3 to 4 Pokemon advantage in this case. Trick Room still being up, I think, is still a great spot to be in. We don't necessarily know the speed interactions between the Ursaluna and the Iron Hands just yet, but the Calyrex Ice Rider has hit the field now. We'll be able to threaten this Ursaluna with those Glacial Lances. And thanks to it being a very bulky Pokemon, it's one of the few things that can somewhat comfortably take a Facade from this Guts-boosted Ursaluna.
And what's really great about Luca's position here is that called out this Incineroar as Will-O-Wisp. Well, Dillon's Calyrex is Terra Fire. You could invest that. If you're Dillon, make sure that you're going to be immune to those Will-O-Wisps, but it does make you very vulnerable to a Headlong Rush or an Earthquake.
It does. You know, you have to make sure that if you do opt to go for that Earthquake, you're essentially done with this Incineroar for the rest of the game. I believe the Ursaluna is probably going to be attacking first. I guess we don't know that for sure, but that's what you might expect on a team composition like this, as it does go straight for that Terastallization to remove the Ice-type weakness.
I can also actually see the Ice Rider maybe just even going for something like a high horsepower into this Incineroar, but it is just the Glacial Lance to get that spread damage. Very powerful Pokemon, but Incineroar does hang on from that attack. But with the Earthquake, you're going to be dealing the final blow to your own Incineroar, taking out the Ogerpon with it.
I don't know if this is a great spot for Luca anymore. I think if Trick Room doesn't run out this turn, I lost count of that myself.
There's one more turn.
One more turn. All right, so the Miraidon now is locked on the field in Trick Room against a Calyrex Ice Rider that is going to be attacking before the Ursaluna, which actually might just be knocked out by another Glacial Lance itself. So despite the Trick Room going up, being a pretty great start for Luca, we're now in a position where someone that set up the Trick Room is having it used against them. It's kind of a theme of Trick Rooms we've seen being set up on stream this weekend.
And Iron Hands coming back in can just go for the fake out into this Miraidon, at least stop it from attacking, make it a little bit easier for this Ice Rider Calyrex to actually clean up because you can't protect it. So,
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, the Trick Room looked really good. The Ursaluna was set up to do a lot of damage. You know, it got a good Earthquake off. It got a good Facade off to knock off that Miraidon. But Dillon made pretty good use of his own tools in Trick Room. We got the slow Calyrex and the slow Iron Hands. It's possible that Luca made some assumptions about the training on Dillon's Pokemon, especially that Calyrex, saying, okay, maybe I think you're a little bit faster, so I'll be able to attack first in Trick Room. And if that was the case, oh, they speed tied?
Well, there's no fake out, that's for sure. So the Facade is going to just get a clean knockout onto the Iron Hands. So it's all on this Calyrex to try to get a double KO. And it's going to be at least not able to do it to the Miraidon, but the Ursaluna is, just barely. There's going to be burn damage at the end of this turn, though. So I think Dillon just takes this game.
Looks like it. Dillon's going to go up 1-0 in this top 4 match. Am I wrong, or did the Calyrex attack first last turn? I thought it did. Maybe I just got that mixed up. So it's possible that I just flipped that in my head, but the Calyrex being able to get that final Glacial Lance off was the big difference maker. Of course, coming very close to the KO in the Ursaluna, but the burn from the Flame Orb activating Guts was enough to take it out. And again, it just comes down to that Trick Room that Luca set up with the Lunala kind of being used against him. That Miraidon was a sitting duck against that Calyrex Ice Rider, and even if it's trained to be a little bit bulky, it's hard to survive a super effective Glacial Lance.
I feel like some Miraidon nowadays are trained to have just a little bit more defensive investment.
Yeah.
But yeah, that one definitely not, unfortunately. So that was a good KO for this Ice Rider Calyrex to take. And unfortunately for the Ursaluna, it just didn't have enough HP to actually survive to the end. But Trick Room was going to expire at the end of that turn, so the Ursaluna would have been at the mercy of this Miraidon, or the Ice Rider Calyrex regardless. But yeah, this was I feel like it was good for Luca until we saw the Trick Room turn start to go.
Thinking back too, I'm pretty sure that is a speed tie on the Calyrex and Ursaluna, because on the turn that the Incineroar got Earthquaked, the Glacial Lance barely didn't knock out the Incineroar, and then Earthquake did, and Trick Room was up. So they had to have just been speed tied and kind of flipped the orders on those 2 turns. Really good for those players to know, just knowing that, okay, maybe I thought I trained mine to be a little bit faster or slower given certain circumstances, but no matter if Trick Room is up or not, the Calyrex and Ursaluna are going to be trading back and forth in terms of who goes first.
Yeah, we'll see if Luca decides to actually go for these Trick Room turns now that we've seen that speed interaction happen. But I think for Dillon, like, I don't think you make any changes. I feel like you're okay with how that game played out. Maybe you start thinking ahead of, okay, well, if Luca's going to actually make an adjustment here, maybe I start to think ahead about how I can beat that. But I feel like a lot of these trainers have been able to find the advantage by making sure they're the ones taking the proactive plays. So Dillon is going to make an adjustment, though, for the second game. Already being up 1-0 in the series, you do have a little bit of wiggle room to do that, as Dillon's going to have the Farigiraf and the Miraidon. And this time around, Luca has decided to bench at least one restricted for now, as it's the Lunala next to the Incineroar, with this Lunala capitalizing on the Electric Train that Dillon has set for him.
Immediately getting that defense boost from the Electric Seed, which might not look too relevant against 2 special attackers, but Farigiraf is again running the Foul Play attack, which uses the defensive stat of the Lunala, so that will be really helpful. You know, it is a double super effective attack thanks to the dark typing, but even if the Miraidon's able to break the Shadow Shield with something like a Volt Switch or Electro Drift, one foul play shouldn't be enough to knock out that Lunala. We'll allow it to stick around and maybe get some damage out with the Moonblast, possibly save it for later for a Trick Room as well.
We're going to see a Terrestrialization invested, though. For Dillon, it's going to be the options of the Farigiraf being able to grab something like the Terra Water, or we're going to see the Miraidon just take the Terra Electric, removing its Dragon-type weakness to these Moonblast. But even when we saw the Miraidon take the Moonblast last game, Miraidon held on pretty okay, and even able to come back in to sacrifice itself to get Dillon a better board position later. And the Electro Drift with the Terra Electric, though, actually does a sizable amount of damage. Moonblast now in return does even less because you're removing that super effective weakness. But with the Foul Play from the Farigiraf, it's just not enough to actually get the knockout onto the Lunala, as Will-O-Wisp now comes through from the Incineroar to burn the Miraidon. Luca really just kind of covering in case you actually saw some type of switch there. If it was a Bolt Switch from the Miraidon, you get the Will-O-Wisp onto a physical partner in the back.
I do like that Will-O-Wisp a lot. Assuming the Miraidon goes for Volt Switch was a pretty great move to be using in this situation. You do get a burn onto presumably either the Iron Hands or the Calyrex Ice Rider, which are the two most likely Pokemon to have in the back, and neither of which would enjoy being burned. But the Electro Drift Foul Play combo there leaves Lunala pretty vulnerable to another follow-up attack from either the Farigiraf or the Miraidon. Farigiraf here especially is in a very good spot. This Incineroar is not using a Dark move, and it has the Flare Blitz, U-Turn, and Will-O-Wisp on top of the Fake Out. So not being threatened by too much damage at all right now.
Incineroar just leaves the field. Ursaluna comes in. Well, if there's a Trick Room, that's going to be great for the Ursaluna, but Dillon can still play around this. Terraformation onto the Lunala is going to be important here to at least boost up some of these Moonblasts if you want to. Also removes your weakness to those foul plays. So if we do see a Farigiraf try to attack this Lunala again, it is going to be a little bit neutralized. But the Electro Drift into the Ursaluna, that's why Luca decided to switch it in, because it was going to be a great target if it was the Incineroar. And take a look at how well this Fairy Terror works out defensively. Lunala is now safe to be able to go for the Trick Room here. And now Ursaluna is positioned perfectly. Gets to come in, get that Guts activated by the Flame Orb right away, and start going after these KOs.
Perfect turn by Luca there. Swapping the Ursaluna into the most likely target for that Electro Drift means that Miraidon is now stuck on the field against this Ursaluna, and Lunala has also stuck around to set up that possible combo of Wide Guard and Earthquake to make sure you're getting damage onto both of your opponent's Pokemon without damaging your own. Of course, you can also go straight for, more single target attacks. Facade is a huge threat here. Facade is a 140 base power move after the burn on top of the Guts boost, on top of same type attack bonus. It is really, really difficult to take Facades without losing too much of your HP, especially combined with this Lunala, which is now threatening with boosted Moonblast thanks to the Terastallization. So what was a rough start to the game for Luca has now turned into a pretty great position where this Ursaluna is primed to start taking KOs.
Wonder how this Farigiraf is going to fare. I mean, you have the Electric Seed that does boost up your defense just a little bit to be able to maybe help out versus something like this Ursaluna. But you're right, Facade has been so good in this format because of just how many KOs it's actually able to get, or what can actually switch into it. We're going to see Dillon make the choice to remove the Miraidon from the field to try to stall out a couple turns of Trick Room, and this Ogerpon is going to take its place to take this Facade, but I mean, it's not very effective, and you basically bring the Ogerpon down to its Focus Sash. Dillon is free to reverse the Trick Room, though.
That's a really nice play for Dillon there, swapping the Ogerpon in, especially because that Sturdy will make sure it doesn't get one-hit KO'd. That is a resisted Facade, by the way, doing that much damage to the Ogerpon, but as long as the Ogerpon sticks around, it is now threatening a really powerful Ivy Cudgel into this Incineroar. Cannot Terastallize away from that weakness as Lunala already has, and more importantly, Ivy Cudgel is not a contact move. Ogerpon is in range for being knocked out by a Rocky Helmet recoil damage, but if you use Ivy Cudgel into Incineroar, you don't actually take that recoil, and combined with something like Helping Hand might be enough for a KO. Nothing. Oh, Urshifu is there actually. Is a nice rock resist in play for Luca, but it's a really rough position to be in still.
Yeah, we're actually going to see the Incineroar get removed once again as Lunala, already at very low HP, takes the field and is going to provide an okay partner here for this Ursaluna, I think. As we see the Helping Hand onto Dillon's Ogerpon, the Ogerpon just goes for the Ivy Cudgel to secure the KO onto the Lunala. It would have been nice to be able to get that targeted into the Incineroar, but Luca understands. I think this Lunala has done what it needs to in this game, and I've really got to start thinking ahead towards the rest of the end of game number 2. Earthquake now from the Ursaluna. Pretty good to at least get the KO onto the Ogerpon and remove that rock-type threat for the Incineroar, and just do a little bit of damage there to that Farigiraf.
I think a worthy sacrifice that Lunala served as this turn. Since Trick Room did get reversed, and since it was at such low HP, it would have been knocked out by almost any attack from the remainder of Dillon's Pokemon. So at this point, you were not setting up Trick Room again as much as you wanted to. Urshifu does replace it, though. We are seeing this Choice Band Urshifu come out for Luca for the first time on stream. Is threatening some pretty big damage with that Choice Band Surging Strikes, which would be able to bypass the defense boost from the Electric Seed on the Farigiraf. But the Miraidon is the fastest thing on the field still with that Choice Scarf, and you are being threatened by a very powerful Electro Drift. You can't possibly go for Aqua Jet to try and get some damage off before you get knocked out thanks to the Armor Tail.
And you can't protect either because you are Choice Band locked. So this Miraidon could just continue to go for Electric Drifts. Incineroar's not going to want to take that either. You could see Luca hovering to see just how many turns of Electric Terrain were left this Ursaluna can still go for damage because Dillon has to make the choice. Do you want to just use the Miraidon now to just go for these electric type attacks? Or do you want to actually try to make sure that you have some move that you can lock into to deal with this Ursaluna? There's still a 4th Pokemon there for Dillon, so that's why we see the Helping Hand into the Volt switch to go into the Urshifu, and it's a one-hit knockout. So Dillon gets a chance to use that electric type attack for that super effective damage, secure the KO, and change that move later as Dillon gets to reveal that 4th and final here.
I think the Helping Hand there, just covering in case the Incineroar swapped in there to make sure that it gets knocked out. Calyrex will be the final Pokemon for Dillon, so it will have to take an attack from this Ursaluna as it swaps in. As we've seen, the speed interactions here are a little bit weird, so this Facade, after it does a big chunk of damage, sets up this Calyrex for a possible knockout on following turns. Incineroar will be the remaining Pokemon for Luca here, so it's going to be, that Incineroar coming in with the Intimidate. Again, Armor Tail cannot allow the use of Fake Out here for Incineroar, so there's no Fake Out pressure for the remainder of this game. Now it's a 3-2, but this Miraidon can only lock into one attack for the rest of the game as well.
I still think it's a really tough position for Luca to be in. Like, this Incineroar can do a lot, but with its move choices, you don't even have knockoff. You just look at U-turn, Flare Blitz as your damage options. U-turn's not going to get you any sort of pivot. It's just going to be doing damage. And for the Will-O-Wisp as well, you can burn the Calyrex. That is an option, but the Calyrex is going to protect on this turn, and we'll have to see what the Farigiraf can make do of the rest of this situation. Foul play into the Ursaluna is still going to do a pretty good amount as the Flare Blitz just misses the mark there because the Calyrex protects.
Ursaluna has a chance to fire off an attack here, and it will be the Facade into the Farigiraf. Thanks to the +1 defense, might have been able to take that, but the critical hit comes through and knocks out this Farigiraf. And now, Rosemary, we might be in a situation where a Speed Tie is going to decide the game. Miraidon comes back in here, probably with that Electric Terra, is able to one-hit KO this Incineroar, and then it comes down to, does the Ice Rider Calyrex or the Ursaluna attack first?
Well, the Miraidon is certainly going to be the fastest thing for now. And so, I feel like in this position, you need to lock into Draco Meteor, no?
Possibly, yeah. I don't know. If you lock into Electro Drift, you do, the game just hinges on the Speed Tie. If you lock into Draco Meteor, you give yourself the option to keep attacking with one of your Pokemon. The Double Protect, though!
The Double Protect onto the Calyrex means that you just have another attack negated, but the Draco Meteor misses in return. So the Ursaluna is not going to get knocked out on this turn, despite the fact that the Incineroar was trying to go for the Flare Blitz into the Calyrex. What a turn! Ursaluna is going to go for Earthquake, and it actually is going to attack the Incineroar next to it, as well as the Miraidon on the other side. And so gosh. 2 knockouts for this Ursaluna, and it's just Calyrex versus Ursaluna at the end of this game.
You were right, Draco Meteor would have been a great lock there because it would have forced the Incineroar to kind of 1v2 the rest of this game, especially with that double protect. But the miss on Draco Meteor means it is now down to the Calyrex Ice Rider and the Ursaluna once again.
Oh my gosh, at least you know that this Glacial Lance would be super effective into the Calyrex, but this Ursaluna is certainly packing a 1-2 punch, and the Calyrex moves. It's gonna get the Glacial Lance to the Ursaluna, finish it off, and Dillon Kleinvehn moves on to the finals of the Milwaukee Regional Championships.
What a great set. Dillon showing that Ice Rider Calyrex is still the one to beat, even with the surge in Miraidon and Lunala. Wide Guard is not enough to stop this Ice Rider from Glacial Lancing its way all the way into the finals. And Dillon has set himself up a date with Andrew Ding in the finals of the Milwaukee Regional Championships. How exciting.